There is your famous photograph.
I didn't even know the Beatles were in India.
I was just a kid with a camera. The pictures, I put them away for 32 years. I just forgot about them.
India, a place of spiritual enlightenment. What happens when a 23-year-old Westerner goes there in search of himself and he finds the Beatles are there too?
It was a lovely lie that led a 23-year-old Canadian, Paul Saltzman, to India in 1968 in search of meditation. What he found, or rather whom he found along the Ganga, were the Beatles in the midst of their iconic sojourn to Rishikesh, also in search of inner peace via meditation at the famous ashram of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. During his stay at the ashram, Saltzman, then nursing a deeply hurtful heartbreak, ended up spending some extraordinary time with John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. He took more than 50 intimate photographs of the four and their friends in the salubrious air of Rishikesh, which he locked away for over 3 decades. Then one day, recently at his daughter's urging, he found them. The result is this remarkable documentary flowing from those photographs titled The Beatles in India. Paul Saltzman spoke to Mayank Chhaya Reports about it.
Let me start with a very broad one. You were, I think, 23 when you first went to India. Is that right?
Correct.
And what took you there at that age?
So when you get to watch the film, the whole story is in the film, and it's told probably better than I can tell you now. But the short version is that I heard my soul talk to me for the first time in my life, and I didn't believe in a soul. I'd been brought up by left-wing atheist parents, and they taught that there's no God, there's no soul, there's no spirit. But what they did teach, which was brilliant, is the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. So that was the main teaching I got in the area of what might be called religion. But I woke up one morning in my little rented room in Montreal. I was working for the National Film Board of Canada. And I had the shocking thought that there were parts of myself I didn't like. And I had never had that kind of thought before. I wasn't a very conscious young man, although I was conscious enough that I'd already been a civil rights worker in Mississippi in 1965. And I was, I thought everything was going great. I had already been the host of my own television show on national Canadian television. I'd dated, I drove a sports car that I paid for, et cetera, et cetera. But when I woke up and had that thought that there were parts of myself I didn't like, I was a little bit shocked. And in that moment, I sat up and I swung my legs over the edge of my bed, and I said out loud without thinking, and that is one of the keys, the without thinking part. I said out loud, what do I do about this? And I heard an inner, deep, resonant, all-loving, all-reassuring voice that I'd never heard before say, well, if you really want to look at yourself more intimately, Paul, you might need to get away from the environment you grew up in. And I said out loud, where do I go? And it was this odd conversation. It was without thinking. It was just being in the flow. Mm-hmm. And I said out loud, where do I go? And that inner voice said, India. And I had no connection with India, no interest, meditation, mysticism, none of that was on my radar. But I was so moved by that inner voice that I went up to a film director at the film board who I knew, and I knew he was going to India to do a documentary. And I went up to him in the lunchroom of the film board and I said, I'd like to work on your documentary. And he said, I'm sorry, I'm not taking anyone from here. I'm hiring a local sound man in Bombay. They were all sound men in those days. And he said, I'm picking up a cinematographer, director of photography in London. And then there was this silence because I didn't know what to say. And of course, you've probably learned that silences are in truth golden in many ways. And in that silence, he said to me, "Have you ever done sound?" And without a beat of hesitation lying through my teeth, I said, "Absolutely."
Well,
That's right. So he said, "Well, if you get yourself to India, I'll pay you the same as I was going to pay the Indian sound man." I said, "How much is that?" He said, $500. We shook hands, and I went to the phone and I called the airline and I said, "How much is a ticket to India?" Because I didn't know.
right.
And it turned out at that time a 90-day excursion return ticket was $550. So I had my airfare. And then I called up the best sound engineer, film sound recording, location recording engineer in Toronto. And I knew him and I said, "Hey, can you teach me sound?" He said, "Sure, come on over." So that's what took me to India the first time.
Well, that's quite some gumption, isn't that?
Yeah. Well, if you follow your heart, things always work the best. The trick is knowing how to listen to the inner heart, the inner soul.
I was thinking about if, maybe you've already done it, but if you write your autobiography, perhaps the first line could be, "My meditation was born of a lovely lie."
That's a good one. I don't know if I'll ever write my autobiography,
If you
but
do, please consider this.
well, thank you. If I do, that's a good line. It's a very good opening.
I was once you land in India, you land in Bombay, right?
Right.
And but the journey from Bombay to Rishikesh, how did that materialize? Were you in Bombay for a few days, or?
Well, I was working on the film, right? So what happened was the film, and you can actually see it online if you ever want to. It's only about 17 minutes long. It's you go to the National Film Board of Canada's website, and it's called Juggernaut.
Okay, I'll check it out.
And it's a documentary following the first Calandria, which was the big container for India's first nuclear reactor.
Right.
And so it arrived by ship from Canada, and we met it. It was offloaded at the docks in Mumbai. It was loaded on a huge, long tractor trailer, not the kind you normally see, way bigger. And the next, I forget, 3 weeks, we traveled with it across up the coast into Gujarat and across into Rajasthan and Kota, which was where the first nuclear reactor was. And, it went 3, 4, 5 miles an hour. So, and they had spent a year or two preparing for its arrival. They had to lower roads and raise bridges and move power lines because this thing was humongous.
It was,
and so it's and you see some of those adjustments being made when we actually were on the road, because no matter what they did, there were moments where it didn't fit and they had to knock off someone's balcony. So then I got to Delhi. It was around 3 weeks later, 3-4 weeks later, and I got a letter from my girlfriend, who I loved dearly, and she loved me dearly. She didn't want me to go to India. I didn't want to leave her, but we both cried and we both didn't want to part, but I had to do this. And I opened the letter from her, and the first line was, "Dear Paul, I've moved in with Henry." And I was devastated.
Wow.
I was quite shattered. And somebody said, "Why don't you try meditation for the heartbreak?" And that person, I said, "I'll try anything." That person, who was an American guy who I'd like to find. I thanked him way back then, but I'd like to thank him on a more deep level, but I haven't been able to find him. I haven't hired a private detective, but there's a number of people with his name. His name is Al Bragg, Bragg.
I see.
And he said, "Why don't you try meditation for the heartbreak?" I said, "I'll try anything." He said, "I'm going to hear the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi speak at New Delhi University tonight. Do you want to come? I didn't know who that was. And I said yes, and we went. We got lost on the way to the university. When we arrived, it was just before it was starting, and the auditorium was standing room only, literally. So we squeezed in and had our backs up against the back wall. And what the Maharishi said, I only remember one thing, and this is all in the film. I think you'll like it. I think you'll enjoy it because these stories I had to tell without visuals. So I used graphic novel illustrations for the stories that are no visuals, including meeting the Beatles and hanging out with them. Those are all recounted by me narrating, but using graphic novel illustrations.
Yeah.
But the only thing I remember the Maharishi said, and I remember word for word, he said, meditation takes you beneath and below your daily worries and concerns to a place of inner rejuvenation from which you come back renewed and refreshed. I thought, that's what I need. So in that way that life is magically unfolding when we do follow our hearts, truly magically unfolding. I talked to a few people after the lecture, and they told me about his ashram in Rishikesh. I never did think of going up to one of the officials and saying I'd like to learn meditation, because they would have said, you know, come tomorrow to the office in wherever it would be in Delhi.
Right.
So a couple days later, I took a train to Rishikesh. I was pretty heartbroken. I was very heartbroken and suffering. And I didn't realize the train didn't stop in Rishikesh. I watched the sign Rishikesh go by the window at high speed. I thought, oops. So I got out at the next station, which was Dehradun, and I took a taxi. I took a taxi back to Rishikesh, and I said to the taxi driver, I said, you know where the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's ashram is? And he said, most of the ashrams are the other side of the river. So I went down to the river and I paid a boatman, you know, whatever it was, 5 rupees. And he took me across the river. And I said, do you know where the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's ashram is? As we landed, he said, Maharishi ashram that way. And he pointed downriver. So I start walking along the bank of the river, and I don't know what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And, you know, a good, I don't know whether probably a half mile down the river. And I'm just looking around, trying to see where I'm going. And as I look over at one point to the left in the trees on the bank of the river, I see a sign nailed to a tree. And literally the sign was like this big. Mm-hmm. And, it, you know, the kind of sign that has a point at one end to point the direction.
Right.
And it was pointing straight up, and it said ashram.
Well, that's where it was.
Yep. So I found the path. I found the path where the sign was, and I walked up the cliff on this path, and I got to the front gate of the ashram. And there was a chowkidar there who didn't speak English. And he called a young man who turned out to be Raghavendra. And Raghavendra was number 3 in the ashram. And I said to Raghavendra, I've come to learn meditation. And he said, I'm sorry, the ashram's closed because the Beatles and their wives are here, and we're doing a course for TM teachers. And I didn't know they were in India, and I was already a fan.
Hold on. Let me stop. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you can interrupt anytime.
You are gently throwing it in. The Beatles, you know, this is cinematic. I'm sure you realize you're a filmmaker yourself. You know, everything that you've told me so far.
Right.
Like a movie script.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true.
And I read some of your writings on your website. You are cinematic in your writing too.
Yeah, thank you.
Very visual. You're very, very visual.
Yeah, that's true. That's just the way I am.
So when you were told that the Beatles were there,
right,
I'm sure it rang a bell, right?
Well, it actually was bad news. That's the, you know, I was in agony, genuinely in agony. And so he said, I'm sorry, the ashram's closed because the Beatles and their wives are here. We're doing a course for TM teachers. And I said, you have to teach me. And I told him that I can't remember the words. I remember saying, you have to teach me. I don't remember what I said about what was going on. I may have shed a tear or two. I don't remember, but I was in that kind of feeling that my eyes would have certainly filled with tears, I imagine. I can't remember that. And he said, well, I'll go ask the Maharishi. I won't be able to come back for 2 or 3 hours, but I'll send you a cup of chai. And he left, and about 20 minutes later, another bearer came down to the front gate carrying incongruously a white china tea set. Mm-hmm. And I poured myself chai and added, I think I added sugar, and I sat down and leaned my back up against the gate, sat down, and really it was like a dirt path. So I was just sitting on the ground. And I waited, and Raghvendra came back. It was 2 or 3 hours later. I don't remember the time. And he said, I'm sorry. The Maharishi says, not at the present time. And I'm someone who loves words for what they can mean and, right. and what direction they can point you in. And I don't know what I would have said if he hadn't said the words, not at the present time, because I said, can I wait? And he was a little taken aback. Yeah. And he said, oh, okay, like that. He said, oh, okay. And he pointed across the path under the trees. There were 2 old army tents set up on platforms. And he said, the first one is used by the tailor from the town below, but the second one is empty. You can sleep there. And we'll send you our simple vegetarian meals, he said. So this man... And I say it, you'll see it in the film, because again, this is all told with graphic novel. So Raghvendra was my angel. This was an angel. So for the next 8 days, I waited outside the gate. I was fed vegetarian meals, and I just waited, and I wrote in my diary, and I suffered, and I met Lewis Lapham, who came to write for the Saturday Evening Post, and he's still a friend to this day, because he couldn't get in for 3 days. So we sat and talked all day because he had nothing to do but wait as well. He stayed in a guest house, but he would come up to the gate every day because he didn't know when he was going to get in. So we got to be friends. And finally, on the 8th morning, kind of classic mist rising off the Ganges far below. And Raghvendra came back. And by the way, Raghvendra came and saw me every day. He was a darling. And I think, I didn't ask him this. And when I started to make the film, I tried to find him, and I couldn't find him. It turned out that he was still living, but by the time I made contact with someone in his family, which took a long time, he had passed. So I never got to talk to him about that. But I think what he realized, first of all, was, number one, I was completely authentic. I wasn't there to meet the Beatles. It wasn't good news because I couldn't get in because of that. Right. And I think the other thing is, when he would come and visit me every day, we would talk. And I think he got to know me. I think he got to know that I wasn't there to do anything except learn meditation to heal a broken heart. Mm-hmm. So finally he said, okay, you can come in now. And he took me to his meditation room, and he taught me meditation. It took 5 minutes. He said, try it and see what it's like. And we're sitting together, and I'm sitting cross-legged on the floor, which I'd never done in my whole life. So I tried it, and he said, what are you experiencing? I said, well, my knees are hurting, because I had never sat that way. And I said, and I'm a bit distracted by the dog that was barking outside. And he said, that's okay. When you find you're not saying your mantra, don't wrestle with it, or you're out of the meditation. Just choose to go back to your mantra gently. And he said, I'll now leave you alone. You're welcome to spend your days in the ashram. We don't have any extra beds, so you'll have to still stay in the tent. I said, great, thank you. And he left me alone. And I did a first meditation. Now, I knew nothing about this stuff, right? But I did a first meditation, and I transcended twice in terms of transcendental meditation. What I experienced was, I hadn't fallen asleep. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, but all of a sudden I was kind of back in the room. I didn't know where I had been, but I'm doing my mantra, and then all of a sudden I'm consciously back in the room. And a half an hour later, it felt like I was finished. And I came out of the meditation and it was an absolute miracle. It was a miracle. I was in joy. I was in bliss. And George Harrison later told me when we were sitting alone together, he said, I get higher meditating than I ever did on drugs. And I had done drugs and I knew what he meant. So
that's amazing. I read, in fact, in one of your pieces on your site.
Yeah, no, it's
about George Harrison.
Yeah, absolute miracle. And so I went out of the room and I'm just walking through the ashram. I am literally not thinking Beatles at all, not even in my brain. I'm just so relieved and in a altered state of bliss. And I'm just looking around at the trees and a few monkeys and lovely big green parakeets in the trees. And as I'm walking along, I look over to my right and I see John Lennon sitting at a table by the edge of the cliff. And I can tell that Paul was sitting opposite him just from the side of Paul's face. And by the way, do you pronounce your name Mayank or how?
It is Mayank.
Mayank.
Yeah, it means moon in Sanskrit.
It means
the moon in Sanskrit.
I'm not catching.
Moon, M-O-O-N.
Ah, the moon. Cool. Right. Lovely. And what does Chhaya mean in Sanskrit? Shadow. A moon shadow.
Yeah. Well, I am under that. Yes.
So you've heard whose song? Moon Shadow. Van Morrison, I think, one of his early songs.
Right. Yeah. Somebody had pointed that out to me.
Yeah. It's a beautiful song.
It is. Yeah.
So what actually happened was that I didn't think. It was again that state of grace where your heart is guiding you, not your thinking. You know, an evolved, enlightened man that I did consciousness work with in the United States from 1988 to 1990, who had the full awakening experience, the full nirvana experience, the full Christ experience. And he was an author and teacher in consciousness. And he said one day in a seminar that I was sitting in, he said, if I had to sum up all my experiences and all my writing and all my teaching into one sentence, he said, I'd say it's all about integrating the head and the heart. And I do a lot of work with young people and others, and it always comes up. There's always a moment where I can say, this is a wonderful computer. It's a shitty guidance system.
True.
This is a wonderful guidance system. It's a shitty computer. So it's about how you integrate them. So I see John and I don't go into thought. I literally find myself curving. It's like, oh, I'm curving over.
No. Once again, I must jump in here to interject.
No, please.
I'm sure you do realize that when my audience hears this, because we're talking about the Beatles. We're talking about the 1960s, 1968 to be precise. Yeah. You are in Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's ashram on the Ganga.
Yeah.
And your reaction is almost non-existent so far. Now, it's a remarkable thing for me even to visualize. And I'm quite struck by the fact that you were almost detached from that reality at that point.
Well, yeah, and that's where the, in a sense, the altered state is a state of grace, right? State of grace. So I find myself curving to them, and as I'm about halfway over to them, they're like 150 feet away, but as I'm about halfway there, with detachment, the detachment of the altered state, I just notice, oh, my heart's beating a little faster. And I get to the edge of the table and I see that it's John and Paul and George and Ringo and Mia Farrow and Mike Love of the Beach Boys and Donovan and Mal Evans, their roadie, and there's Cynthia and Patty and Jane Asher with Paul and Maureen with Ringo's wife. And they're talking, so I don't interrupt, but I'm standing at the end of the table, long table, under kind of arbor. And after a few moments, they realize someone's just standing there. So they stop talking, and John looks up at me, and I just said, "May I join you?" Very calm, very relaxed. And he said, "Sure, mate, pull up a chair." And Paul turns to me and says, "Come and sit here." And he pulls a chair over to the end of the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I sit down, and three magical things happen. Now, I should say what I mean by magical, because about 15 years ago, I found myself using the word magical in a particular way of this kind of thing, this kind of a magical event. But I didn't know what the dictionary definition was that would relate to the way I was using it. So I went to the big Oxford Etymological Dictionary. It's over there in my bookcase.
Uh-huh.
And I pulled it out, and there's about 24 or 25 meanings of the word magical. And as I start reading number one, number two, number three, I realize that the most common usage is at the top. Makes sense. And then as you go down, when you get down to the bottom, it's the least common usage. Well, of 24 or 25, what I was looking for was like number 23, I think. And it said these words: magic, that which is real, but we as yet do not understand. That which is real, but we as yet do not understand. And if you think about the card trick, the magician who makes the card disappear, it's magic. We don't know how it happens. We don't understand it. If once you know, it's not magic anymore. You know what's happening, right?
Right.
So when I sat down, three magical things happened. The first was that literally as soon as my bum hit the seat, to my surprise, I hear this voice in my head scream, "Eek, it's the Beatles." Now, I saw them live in Toronto in 1964, and I didn't scream at all. I was like this. I was just trying to hear them over all the screaming, right? I just wanted to hear them. And as soon as that voice in my head finishes, and it's a surprise, like, where did that come from? But before I had a chance to think again, I hear my soul talk to me for the second time in my life. Mm-hmm. And my soul says, "Hey, Paul, they're just ordinary people like you. Everyone farts and is afraid in the night."
I read that on your website. That's funny.
That's what it said. And before I have a chance to think, John turns to me and he says, in a way that is teasing and playful, but not complimentary, he says, "So you're American then?" And he's digging. He's digging. It's like, you know, the Brits feeling superior to the Yanks, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I say, "No, Canadian." And he looks back to the rest of the group and he says, "Ah, he's from one of the colonies." Now everyone's laughing. We're all laughing. And then he turns back to me and he says, "So you're still worshiping Her Highness then?" And I say, "No, not personally." And then Paul and Ringo start teasing me about having the Queen on our money, which we still do. Queen's still on our money. And I say to them, "Well, we may have the Queen on our money, but hey, she lives with you guys." So we're all laughing. At which point Cynthia, who's down at the far end of the table, she says, "Come on, chaps, leave the poor guy alone. He's just arrived." At which point John turns back to the rest of the group and he says, "You see, they still have a sense of humor in the colonies." And that was it. They literally just took me into their group. I could have spent 2 months with them. I only spent a week because I came back to see if I could get back with my girlfriend. But that was the process of meeting them. And all I can say, Mayank, is that in the week I spent with them, I took out my camera twice because I didn't think about it.
Right.
Like, it wasn't, hey, these are Beatles. In fact, honest to God, within 30 seconds of that conversation meeting them, I never thought of them as the Beatles again. I literally didn't have the word Beatles in my head. They were these people, like the other people.
4 individuals, yeah.
Yeah, and their partners and the other 4, Mal and Mia and Donovan and Mike. And we were just hanging out together. So I didn't think of taking my camera. Not only that, I didn't even think of saying, "Hey, let's get a picture together." And they had taken me into their group. I could have fun pictures of standing with them. Never thought of asking for autographs. And it's important, I think, to point out, it's not that I thought about it and said, no, I shouldn't. I literally didn't have the thought. And that, right. Again, that was a blessing. And I do think, and I say this in the film, I do think the reason the photographs I took are so intimate is they could feel that I didn't want anything from them, because I didn't want anything from them.
Right.
I came to heal a broken heart. I got it. I got the gift of meditation. I was in an altered state of bliss. I mean, I didn't need anything from, So that was kind of the process.
At what point did you begin, in that week, when did you begin to take photographs?
Well, over the next couple of days, of hanging out with them, I saw them taking lots of photos of each other, just like, family picnic. They had, George and Patty had a camera, and Mal had a camera, and Ringo had a camera, and they would take pictures of each other. And after a few days, I just asked each of them individually. I didn't ask as a group. It just didn't feel right. I just asked individually when I had a moment alone with Paul or John or Ringo or George. I said, hey, do you mind if I take pictures? Each of them said, oh, go ahead, take all you want. And I had lots of film. I only took 54 pictures with anyone famous in them because I just, like I said, it wasn't a thing. It was just
right.
So after a couple of days, I took out my camera, and then a few days later, I took it out again.
And I was reading again that for 32 years, you didn't even think of those photographs.
No, I didn't, and I'll tell you how that.
Where did you keep them after developing them?
Well, what happened was that I came home and I developed them. I also had a 100-foot roll of 16 millimeter film.
I see.
Because, the picture you may have seen of me with Ringo, and he's showing me how to use the camera.
Right.
Ringo came up to me one day and he said, we're making a film about the Maharishi, but I'm always behind the camera. Would you shoot some film for me so I can be in the film?
I see. And
I said, sure. And he showed me how to use it, which is what you see in that photograph. And I shot film for a couple of days, and then that was enough. And I gave him back the camera, and I gave him all the film. And that afternoon, I was literally sitting under a tree reading, leaning up against a tree. And Ringo came over and he said, here. And he handed me a 100-foot roll of virgin film. He said, here. And he made a joke. Why don't you shoot this and keep it for yourself? You never know, it might be worth some money one day.
Oh, amazing, yeah.
And I said back to him, joking, I took it and the camera, and I said back to him, well, thank you, but I don't know why it would ever be worth any money. We were joking and laughing.
Right.
So I brought home the slides. I shot 3 rolls of Ektachrome 64, 36 exposures each. So I had 72 pictures, but 54 with anyone famous, and the rest were scenics.
Right.
And I developed the pictures, and I was broke, and I needed money to rent a flat. So I went to Canada's national magazine, and I made they wanted the pictures, which nobody had, and they wanted the story of meeting the Beatles. For me, I had 2 motivations. 1, I needed to make money to rent a place, but 2, I was very keen to say to people, hey, whoa, there's this magical thing, meditation. Try it. Because remember, in 1968, meditation was not only not on everyone's lips, it was almost on nobody's lips.
True.
People, of course, knew about it from the beginning of time, but it wasn't a thing in North America. Same with yoga. We think yoga has always been, it wasn't really hardly talked about or practiced at all in 68.
That's true.
So I wanted to say as a public service, hey, there's this thing, meditation, check it out. So I did the 1 article, and when I finished it, and I handed it in, and they accepted it, and all that was great. And I was putting the pictures away one day, just cleaning up my desk. And I realized I was feeling badly. I thought, and I said out loud, again, without thinking, one of those kind of moments, I said out loud, why am I feeling badly? And I heard my soul talk to me for the 3rd time in my life. And it said, you're talking about it too soon. You need to let the experience go deeper.
I see.
Brilliant, eh?
It is.
So I remember putting an elastic band around the 3 plastic Kodak slide boxes, and I wrote India 1968, and I remember putting them away with a very specific thought. I don't want to do anything more with these.
Okay.
And I didn't think about them for 32 years. In fact, what happened, I learned later in my life that the nature of the subconscious is it takes things literally.
Right.
So you have to be careful what you tell yourself, right?
Because you'll take it literally, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so when we put ourselves down, which is very common with people, we actually do literally put ourselves down. Do you remember, did you grow up where did you grow up?
I grew up in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad, but I've traveled the Himalayas quite extensively.
Yeah, I've read that about you.
As part of my authorized biography of the Dalai Lama, I spent a lot of time in McLeodganj with him. So I'm very familiar with that entire region. It's my obsession, that place. Unfortunately, I've been here now since 1998. I do go back and forth, but at some point, maybe I would like to live there.
Right. Remind me when we finish to tell you my personal story of the Dalai Lama. You'll be amused.
Why don't you tell me now, since you're mentioning?
So I went back to India in 1972 to make a 1-hour television documentary on the Canadian High Commissioner, the Canadian ambassador from Canada to High Commissioner to India. He was also at the same time the ambassador to Nepal.
Right.
And he had been the High Commissioner in Sri Lanka for 5 years. And he was the most conscious person I'd ever met up till that point in my life. And it motivated me to make a film about him. So among other people, he was saying his goodbyes after 5 years. He was being shifted over to Iran. And so for 8 weeks, I just tagged along with him with my cameraman and sound man, and I was directing and producing. We went all over India and Sri Lanka and Nepal as he's, visiting and saying goodbyes and sort of inspecting projects as he was leaving. And one thing he said, I'm going to go meet with the Dalai Lama. Do you want to come and film that? Of course. So we drove up from Delhi in his Land Rover up to Dharamsala, and we set up the camera and 2 chairs outside the Dalai Lama's house. He's inside having tea with him while we're setting up. So we let him know, okay, we're ready, that we've checked the microphones, we've checked the camera, everything's ready to go. The Dalai Lama comes and sits down, and Jim sits down. We hook up the microphones, and I say, roll sound, action. And the cinematographer says, wait a minute, the camera's not running. The camera would not turn on. We had just been testing it, and it was running fine. Would not turn on.
I see.
Dalai Lama is chuckling. He's chuckling.
He does a lot, yeah.
He does. So the cameraman takes off the magazine, changes magazines, rethreads it. It won't run. Gets the backup battery pack from Jim's Land Rover, hooks up the other battery. It won't run. The Dalai Lama is barely keeping himself from laughing. And as we are about to cancel the shoot, it's like, well, we nothing to do. He says playfully, why don't you try it again? And it runs. And it runs for the whole. And we simply intuitively knew that whatever his power was, he was able to keep the camera from running and then to let go of that and said, try it now. And it worked. Whatever way he did that, we knew it was him messing around with us playfully.
That's
right?
Amazing. It is a remarkable story.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I know I've already taken quite a bit of your time, and I'm glad that you answered almost all of my questions before I asked, so which is terrific. I'm sure you're so practiced in this by now.
Well, it's just
life.
Yeah, it's just the real authentic story, so I don't have to.
Right. Tell me something. Have you, after those 7 days, did you manage to keep in touch with the 4, or what was your relationship?
So first of all, when I was leaving, And it was the same day that Ringo and Maureen left. And we went down to Delhi in 2 taxis together, and we stopped halfway down and all had soda pop on the side of the road. But as I was leaving, saying goodbye to everyone, very warm, loving goodbyes, I turned to walk to the taxi, and John says, "Hey, Paul, will you send us some of your pictures?" And I turn around and I say, "Sure." And Jane Asher says, "Here, take my home number. If you call Apple, you'll never get through to them."
I see.
And so I took her home number. So 6 months later, I was working on the first IMAX film, and we were going to be shooting in London.
Right.
And I had the lab blow up 4 poster-sized portraits. I just picked my favorite shot of each of them individuals, and I blew up portrait poster size, like film poster size. But it was too expensive for color. I really couldn't afford it, so I did black and white. And it's the only time in that up till then that I ever printed black and white, and they were gorgeous in black and white, the portraits of them. And I was in London, and I called up Jane Asher, and we met for tea for half an hour in Kensington. We had a lovely chat, lovely reminiscing. I gave her the 4 portraits. I thought to myself, do I give her my card? Do I say, let me know how they like them? And you know what I thought? I thought, these guys don't need new friends. Their lives are crazy.
Yeah.
So I gave them to her, and I never gave any contact information. And I never tried to get in touch with them again till later when I was doing my first book. But what's fascinating is, and again, talking about magic, right? I get in a taxi when we say goodbye because I'm going to meet a friend who I knew from the National Film Board in Montreal. He was a producer. And we had kept in touch. And he said, "Hey, come over. We're going to screen a new film that he had been working on." So I get in a taxi, and I take a taxi into Soho, I think it was, to George Martin's Look, Listen Productions. I think that's what it was called. And I get out of the taxi, and I walk into this place, and I'm expected. And I meet my friend, Bob Bayless is his name. And he says, "Come on, we're going to screen this film. It just came out of the lab. It's the first release print." We go into a darkened theater. He introduces me to 2 other people. So there's now 4 of us. And they roll the film. It's the first copy of Yellow Submarine. Now, I didn't, this is like magic. I didn't know.
I mean, I've been noticing there is so much serendipity in your life.
Yeah.
I don't blame you for thinking that it's all magical. It is magical.
Well, and I think I really do, honestly, without it being naive, without it being airy-fairy, I do know that when we truly listen to our hearts, that's the best guidance system on the planet. When we truly open ourselves to hear our own soul's guidance, it never leads us wrong. It's when we don't listen to our inner guidance that we get.
That's when things go wrong, yes.
So, by the way, marijuana, of course, was extremely illegal then. But we're starting to screen the film, and one of the other guys lights up a joint and passes it around. And as the film is unspooling and the songs are playing, we're passing around a joint. And by the end of the film, we're all singing with the film. And I didn't know till after that the 2 other people, one was the editor, Peter something, I forget his name, and the other was the assistant editor. So that was just, wow, magical. So then what happened next was, in terms of knowing them, in terms of your question, I never tried to get in touch. And that was simply, in some sense, a matter of I don't need anything, and a matter of respect. And these guys don't need new friends. Their lives are crazy.
That's a very interesting way to look at it. They don't need any new friends. It's a very unusual approach. I haven't heard that before. It's remarkable. My compliments on that.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's just what my inner voice was saying to me. But when I started to do my first book, The Beatles in Rishikesh, I couldn't get in touch. I tried to get in touch to talk to Paul and Ringo, John and George had both passed.
Right.
And all I wanted to say is, how did that period and how did meditation impact your lives, impact your creativity? But I couldn't get through. I had a couple of, when I wanted to start making this film, which I have been wanting to make for 15 years. By the way, I should tell you how the pictures came out of hiding in a way.
Right.
One day, my daughter, she's 16 years old by this time, she and her 3 best girlfriends all have discovered the Beatles. And it's not because I told stories, because I never told stories. And because, that inner voice said, you need to let it go deeper, right?
Right.
So, and I put the pictures away with the self-instruction. I don't want to do anything more with these. So I not only literally didn't think about them for 32 years, but my daughter had asked me as a bedtime story. Her mother is from India, my ex.
I see.
And somewhere around when she was about 8 years old, and my tradition with her was I would tell her bedtime stories and sing her lullabies, which I love to do. That would be our quiet time before she went to sleep. And I obviously at some point told her, she asked me, tell me about the first time you went to India, Dad. And I don't remember what I said. I told her about the first time. 8 years later, she's 16, she walks into my study one day and she says in a quizzical voice, didn't you tell me when I was little that you met the Beatles in India? Those were her exact words.
I see.
And I say, yeah. And she said, didn't you tell me you took some pictures of them? And I say, yeah. And she said, like, duh, can I see them? And then I searched for them. It took 3 weeks because I hadn't seen them in 32 years. In fact, I'll tell you the story of that because it's pretty interesting. I searched my whole house. I searched my office, which was in my coach house. I couldn't find them. I asked my assistant to search the office. I said, go through every file folder, leave no stone unturned. They must be here somewhere. They weren't there. I called my father and said, can you search your house? He searched it. I said, can you search it again? But you got to really, really search it because if it's there, I want it. And he searched his house twice. They weren't there. So I thought to myself, okay, before I get pissed at myself for being sloppy and losing them, not because of Beatles, because my daughter would like to see them, that's all.
Right.
I thought, okay, I'm going to take a day off work, even though I'm self-employed as a filmmaker. I thought, no, I'll take a day off work. So I focus on nothing but finding the pictures. And I started and I looked literally through every sock, every underwear, behind every book, on every shelf, in everything, anything that was closed. And I went from the top of my house. I started in the coach house. 4 hours later, I'm in the basement. I'm searching behind an L-shaped couch where there's some cardboard boxes that have been stuck away because there's no more room in the closets and whatever. And I get to the second last box of everything in the house. And I kind of think, shit, they're gone. And I almost give up. And I hear my soul for the 4th time in my life. I swear to God, I hear this, my soul for the 4th time in my life. And my soul said, keep going. And I laughed out loud. And in the second last box, I open it, and there are the 3 plastic containers with the elastic and India 1968. Right. What I can tell you is I screamed at the top of my lungs. I don't remember if anyone was home or heard me. I screamed, yes! And then I took off the elastic and I'm starting to open the first box. And I remember thinking, dear God, let them be okay, because transparencies can get damaged, that you can have color shifts in the images. And I opened the first one up, and other than a little bit of dust from 32 years, they were pristine. Like they'd come out of the lab the day before. It was more magic, that which is real, but we don't understand. Because I had been very careless.
Yeah.
One thing led to another. And I thought, well, that night I showed them to my daughter on a screen with our slide projector in the living room. And when it was over, and she had asked all the questions, why were you there? What were they like? Just normal stuff as I'm showing them. And when it's all over and I'm packing everything away, she says these words. She says, gee, Dad, they're really great. You should do something with them. And for the next week, I asked my soul 2 or 3 times, so what about if I do? How do I feel about doing something with them? And each time the answer was, yeah, that would be fun. That's what my soul said. So my daughter and I were traveling through London, and I didn't know, were they rare? Were they worth anything? Would anyone want it to? I don't know what to do with them.
Right.
And I find out that there's a man named Stephen Maycock, who at that time was curator of rock and roll memorabilia at Sotheby's auction house in London. So I get in touch and I make an appointment to see him. And my daughter and I go in, and we go into the front of Sotheby's, which is this very rich, ornate lobby. And I figure we're going to go up to his office, but no, we go to a door in the lobby, and he opens the door, and it's like a little cupboard, literally. But there's a light box on a table. And his assistant comes, so he has to get another chair. So now the four of us are in this little cupboard that it was so little, our knees were all touching. And I spread out the 54 pictures, and he takes a loupe, a magnifying glass, and he looks down at the first one, and he goes, huh. And then he moves to the second one, and he goes, wow. And he sits up and he looks at me and he says, you're sure you're not a professional photographer? And I say, no, I was just a kid with a camera. Then he puts his head back down and he looks at the next 52 pictures. He doesn't say a word. And then he sits up and he says, quote, some of these are the best intimate shots we've ever seen of them. What you want to, no, the first thing he said, I'm sorry, I went too fast. The first thing he said is, we see everything for moments like this.
Right.
That dear, very dear. We see everything for moments like this. Some of these are the best intimate shots we've ever seen of them. What do you want to do with them? I don't know. What can we do with them? He said, well, we could auction them off. And I said, and who would buy them? And he said, well, probably Apple, because they try and buy back the best of their own brand. But it depends who's in the room. It could be a private collector. It could be a photo agency like Gamma or Sigma or, all those. And I said, and what will they do with them? And he said, well, they would resell them to magazines and books. He said, you can keep as many copies as you want, but you have to give up the originals, and you have to give up the copyright. They would be buying the originals and the copyright. And I said, and what would they be worth? And he said, well, it depends on the bidding, depends on who's in the room. He said 30, 40, 50,000 pounds, maybe more. Now, at that point, 50,000 pounds was 100,000 Canadian,
right?
Which I could have definitely used, right?
Oh, yeah, sure.
But I said to him, and again, it just came out. I just said to him, that sounds kind of boring. Do you think there's a book here? And he said, oh, for sure. And if you need any help with it, let me know. And so later I got back in touch with him and asked him if he would write the introduction to the book.
I see.
To put it into historical context.
Right.
So then to write the book, I wanted to go back to visit the ashram, to stir memories. So I'd been to India many times, but I had never gone back to Rishikesh. And I say to my two best friends, one is a woman, the other a man, and they had been my best friends for 15 years, 20 years. And I say to them, I'm going to India. Oh, how come you're going to India? I'm going to write a book. Oh, what are you going to write a book about? I'm going to write a book about the Beatles in India. Why are you going to do that? Well, I spent a week with them at the ashram in 1960. You never told us that, they said. and you know what? And you know what I said, Mayank? I said, didn't I? Like, really? So it really was out of sight, out of mind.
No, this is remarkable. This is remarkable. It's quite a story to tell. I'm sure in your daughter's eyes, you would have suddenly become a cool dad with great swag. Right? You're right. My daughter, who's now 19, they love the Beatles. She sings very well, my daughter. So she often sings those songs.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing how they've discovered the Beatles now.
Yeah, generation after generation.
Yeah, and then I come from Ahmedabad. My exposure to Western music was limited, but my eldest brother, who was a well-known architect, he did his master's from Harvard in 1970. He came back with a lot of Beatles tapes, and so I grew up listening to them all the time.
Oh, wow. Fabulous.
And so when I read your story, even my brother in India and my sister in India, my eldest brother died a couple of years ago. They are so excited because the Beatles were part of our lives, sitting in some small place.
Yeah. Well, how marvelous.
Yeah.
They're their music changed my life, as I tell the story in the film of first time I ever heard Tomorrow Never Knows, right?
Absolutely. And they wrote so many songs while they were in Rishikesh.
Yeah, yeah.
Great songs.
Oh, incredible.
I'm sure you'll get snapped up by someone in Hollywood for this. Is a great story. I mean, I'm talking about beyond the documentary, the way you've described your personal story. It's a great movie to make. I was already making a movie in my mind. You're a filmmaker yourself, so I'm sure you'll do a much better job.
Well, I haven't really thought about it, honest to God, and so I'll think about it. I don't know.
Maybe that's the final serendipity for you, a big Hollywood movie.
That would be sweet.